This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Godward, The Wilderness Steps, Spiritual Wisdom and Understanding. And the Prodigal Steps, too. Godward, The Prodigal Steps recounts the fall of spirit man and his struggle to understand his physical experience. The Prodigal Steps have returned him to the birth line, and now he must complete the wilderness steps, be spiritually reborn, and continue his journey Godward. The author is Larry McClure. Happy to have Larry McClure back on this podcast. Larry, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to be back.
Where did you get the idea for the Prodigal Steps?
Well, as a child, if you read the back of my book, I had a lot of tragedy growing up, and I went to the church seeking answers, and I spent a lot of hours in the church, looking for the truth. But unfortunately, I didn't find it, so I stepped out on my own to do my studies. And as I was studying one of my Bibles, I came across this graphic of this pitiful-looking man on his knees, and there were 7 steps leading down to the man, and then there were 7 steps leading up away from the man. Think about someone sitting in a basement and stairs coming down the basement, and then stairs, going up from the basement. Well, each one of these steps had attached to it a Bible verse and a name. And what I found out is these steps were part of the prodigal son, the parable by Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. And the 7 steps that led down to the man began with self-will, selfishness, separation, sensuality, spiritual destruction, and starvation. And the 7 steps that led up from him, starting at the bottom, was realization, resolve, repent, return, reconcile, reclothe, and rejoice. And what I found, during my studies is that every self-willed act or self-willed thought goes through these steps. And for an example, I'll give you, take a married couple, and they get into an argument, and their self-will leads them to be selfish, and their selfishness leads to their separation. The husband ends up sleeping on the couch, and then they start feeding their senses, and they start, talking about each other and to their friends. And this leads to them, the father moving out, and now their marriage, the spiritual bond has been broken, and they just continue to hate each other and put each other down. And it could even lead into infidelity. And eventually it leads to, lawyers and divorce court. So the next step is to get back to where they were. Is one of them has to realize that they need to change. So the father realizes that he misses his kids. He goes to his wife and says, honey, let's resolve this, try to work it out. They repent and ask each other for forgiveness. So the father moves back, he returns, and then they reconcile their differences, and then their marriage is reclothed or repaired, and then the kids all rejoice. And these steps are not just for married couples. This applies to any relationship. I don't care if it's your friendships, business, even countries and nations. I mean, look at Israel and Hamas today, and look at Ukraine and Russia. Do you not think selfishness is involved? Mm-hmm. Of course it is. Somebody on their part decided they wanted something, they went and tried to take it.
From a very young age, your life, you'd mentioned this, you alluded to this earlier, was rife with tragedy following the deaths of your cousins, neighbors, twin brother, as well as your father. That happened all before the age of 12. How helpful has it been writing these books for you?
For me, it was a lifesaver. I finally found the truth that I was looking for. I finally found the answers, and it was closure to all of just what you mentioned, that, I understood it more and why things happen the way they do. And it was just, these things were just a part of my journey. And it may have been that, out of these books came about so that, it can help the healing for others that, have gone through these tragedies.
What happens if we don't reverse the steps, Larry?
Well, these steps the prodigal steps just make you realize your selfishness. But selfishness is the original sin, and it's is not accepted by God. So to get over our selfishness, we have to get over our self will, and the next step from self will is God's will, and that's what the new book is about: is to lead you into God's will. And although you may now realize that you're selfish, or you've had a lot of selfishness in your life, that has to be undone. That is the whole purpose of these steps, is to reverse or undo the steps of selfishness to get you back to, like you mentioned, the birth line, and get back where you can make a better choice now for God's will instead of self will. And it's that's, once you get into that, it's we have to purge ourselves of all selfishness before we can re-enter the God's kingdom, or what we call the promised land. So I walk you through these steps, and it's based on Israel and the Bible. It's all biblically based, but the process or the steps that Israel went through are these steps. And I use those along with the story of Israel, from leading them out of Egypt, or out of the selfishness, into the wilderness, where the wilderness could be purged from them before they ever entered the promised land. All the ones that were selfish, even Moses, didn't make it to the promised land, so they ended up dying there in the wilderness. So that's the whole idea, is for your selfishness to die there and be over, so that you can continue your Christian life and toward the Christ consciousness, I call it.
After completing the prodigal steps, what are the next steps after that?
Well, once you get through the prodigal steps, then the next steps, there's after number 7, there's always a new beginning. So the wilderness step starts with a new beginning, and then during that period, there's judgment, journey, transition, and that's the whole idea: is you're transitioning from the spirit man to the natural man, back to the spirit man, and this transition has to happen before the final Christ consciousness comes. So the next steps involves government, rebellion, double anointing, and then finally you get a reprieve. And that's just to get you to the promised land. So, of course, when you get to the promised land, there's more steps that you got to take after that. But this is all the Bible. The Bible gives you all these steps to follow. The Bible's just not a history book. It's the whole lesson of this transition from spirit man to natural man, back to spirit man. And if we don't, reverse these steps, if an individual uses too many lifetimes of self-indulgence and selfishness, they can lose their ability to reincarnate into the world, and they'll banish themselves to outer darkness, which there's what the Bible calls gnashing of teeth and weeping. So it's very important that you understand these steps and go through these steps and complete them.
I was reading you had said, whether you are aware of it or not, everyone goes to the pig pen. What did you mean by that?
Well, the prodigal son ended up in his number 7 step, or starvation. The only job he could find was feeding pigs for a citizen. So he had taken his inheritance, squandered it to the world, and now he's in poverty, and all he can do is feed pigs, and he's not worth any more to the owner than the pigs. So he wishes that he could just eat what the pigs are eating. And then finally he realizes, of course, he needs to change. So that the self-will steps leads down to that, what I call the pig pen. I like to use the term pig pen because it's where we really just wallow in our selfishness. So everything, finally, we have to, all the selfishness that we've created for our life eventually has to be met and undone in one life or another. So if you stay around the pig pen long enough, all that selfishness just accumulates, and it's what we call karma. And karma is just really just unresolved selfishness. And eventually it has to be resolved. Like I say before, if not, then when we pass away or die, the only thing that we take with us is our will and consciousness. And if our will is self-will and our consciousness is selfishness, then the next step is separation, and separation from what? From God, from the kingdom. So we have to resolve our selfishness and get into God's will, or we'll never make it to heaven.
You stated that you left the church to find answers. over 40 years of research and study now. What are your thoughts, Larry, on the deconstruction of the church?
It's, I mean, what I've learned in my experience with the church, well, that's been many years, is, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the Prodigal Steps, was to help these people that were coming in. The first thing they wanted to do was get them saved and baptized, and technically what they're doing is they're giving them the Christ consciousness and just moving, to the front of the line without them having to go through these steps. Compare that to like joining the Boy Scouts. And as soon as you join the Boy Scouts, they make you an Eagle Scout, which is one of the highest honors in the Boy Scouts. And then they tell you to go earn all your merit badges. Well, why would you want to go earn merit badges when you're already an Eagle Scout? So why would you want to go back and learn about the Christ consciousness when you're already saved and baptized? So, people are starting, to lose their interest in church because the church is not taking them through these steps. I had a preacher tell me one time, he said, Larry, I saved 100 and baptized 100 people this year. And I looked out at the congregation and I said, well, where are they? Not one of them was in attendance. Mm. So, they take them, like I say, to the highest point, and then they tell them to go sit down and try to figure it out. Well, most of them don't have the time to figure it out. I did. I took the time. So that's what I'm hoping with my books, that I can, speed up somebody's process and help these, Boy Scout Christians that earn their merit badges.
So speeding up that process, one of the things you'd like readers to take away from this book and series, what else would you like them to take away?
Well, mainly that everyone goes through this, whether you know it or not. And this is the Bible seems to be, starting at one point and go to the end point, but that's not how it works. The Bible is continuous, so all these steps are continuous. It's not like you go through self-will and then selfishness and you're following the steps, but all these steps follow with you. So, your life can get worse and worse and worse, because you're accumulating so much selfishness over time. And like I say, all that selfishness has to be dealt with or met. And you may be meeting stuff that you did when you were a child in your 30s or 40s or 50s. I mean, I had things coming back to me when I was in my 50s and 60s. So, it has to be met and resolved. So the sooner you can do that and start reversing these steps and knowing that you're going through these steps, then you can start making life work more for you, and dis-ease and despair goes away.
And what is next for you in your writing?
I'm currently working on the third of the Godward series. It's called the Promised Land Steps. So once I get you out of the wilderness, I take you into the Promised Land Steps, where in the Promised Land, you know the story of Israel. They fought giants, and there were walls of Jericho. So it's like once you lived in the world selfishly, and now you've got to learn to live in the world selflessly. So that's what I'm taking you through. And once you complete the selfless steps, then you will truly say that you are in the Christ consciousness.
Larry, did you always want to become a writer?
No. I have many talents. I'm an artist. I draw. I've done a lot of different things, but the jobs that I had, or especially the last job, I got into Word and had to do a lot of things like that in Word. So I learned how to write, and especially putting things together. So I got sick after all these years and was diagnosed with cancer in 2017, and it gave me 6 months to live. And they said with treatment I might get 2 years. So I had been writing all these things for over 40 years. I just had volumes of things that I'd written, and I just felt like maybe in that 2 years I can put it all together in a book form and get it out to people, and maybe leave something behind that I had done, and and show that I was a part of this world. But hey, I've lived 8 years, and now I'm on the third book, so you just don't ever know.
Yeah. The book is Godward, The Wilderness Steps, Godward, The Prodigal Steps. It's available at Amazon.com, also BarnesandNoble.com too. Larry, thank you so much for joining me.
I appreciate you having me, Steve. Thanks.
Thank you. And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast. This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards.